The metal bowl is already resting against his stomach when the rat begins to move. It scratches once, testing the curved iron above it, the sound thin and sharp in the stone chamber. The prisoner's breath shudders against the inside of the bowl. Leather straps hold his wrists to the chair, ankles pinned, chest exposed to the cold air of the Low Countries in the late 16th century. The interrogator does not speak. He adjusts the rim so it seals against flesh. Heat is brought forward slowly. In the provinces that would one day call themselves the Dutch Republic, during the revolt against Spanish rule, Diederik Sanai's name carried weight in towns like Alkmaar and in Kwazan. Under his authority, fear became an instrument. The bowl grows warmer. Inside it, the rat shifts again, then harder, claws scraping and tightening circles. The animal does not understand politics, it understands heat. When the coals press close enough, the iron begins to burn. The prisoner arches against the straps, but the chair is fixed to the floor. The rat searches for escape. There is no exit but down. It begins to gnaw. The sound changes first. Not a scream, but a wet, frantic tearing muffled by metal. Chroniclers later described confessions arriving before blood reached the floor. Some accounts claim the mere presence of the bowl on the stomach was enough to loosen tongues. Others insisted the method was exaggerated by enemies of Sonoy, that Protestant pamphleteers magnified the horror for their own purposes. Yet municipal records confirm arrests, trials, broken bodies. What cannot be disputed is that men left those chambers altered, and many did not leave at all. Long before the Low Countries burned, another empire had understood the appetite of small creatures. In the outer districts of Rome, where crucifixions lined the roads and the Tiber carried refuse and rumor alike, there are scattered references to punishments designed to prolong exposure. Prisoners were restrained, their torsos opened under authority of magistrates whose names are mostly dust. The condemned man lies on his back beneath an Italian sky, wrists and ankles bound to stakes driven into packed earth. His abdomen is already opened, not cleanly, but enough. The smell draws them. Rats move where legions march. They live in grain stores beneath the Capitoline Hill, in the shadows of the Colosseum. Along the docks at Ostia, the condemned man strains against rope that cuts into skin already slick with blood. There is no bowl here, no metal directing instinct. Only the open cavity and the patience of animals that do not fear the still. Some later writers insisted these stories were moral theater, exaggerated by Christian chroniclers eager to paint pagan Rome as monstrous. Modern scholars question how frequently such punishments were used in formal sentencing. Yet the Roman legal system permitted spectacle, and exposure was a language of power. The rats descend anyway. There are moments when the body remains alive longer than dignity. Wind passes over the forum. Vendors continue their trade. Somewhere a magistrate signs another order. The empire does not pause. The man's breathing becomes shallow as movement begins inside him, not from thought, but from teeth. He does not survive the afternoon. Centuries later, stone replaces sky. The Tower of London rises above the Thames, its white walls masking chambers where daylight rarely reaches. Beneath the structure, in corridors that smell of damp straw and stagnant water, there are accounts of a place informally called the Rat Dungeon. Whether that name appears in official inventories is debated. Some guides in later centuries insisted it was Victorian embellishment, crafted for tourists hungry for horror. Yet records confirm cells so dark and so close to the river that vermin thrived without invitation. The captive sits in darkness. He's an older man, once accustomed to council chambers and measured speech. Now he measures time by sound. Dripping water, shuffling claws, the slow erosion of certainty. No coals are needed here. Hunger is constant, and the Thames provides. Rats gather in corners first, cautious. They test boots, then fabric. Days pass, or perhaps hours stretched thin by fear. In the Tower, under monarchs from Henry VIII to Elizabeth I, imprisonment alone could break allegiance. Confessions were extracted by many means, some documented, others only implied in correspondence between officials. It was said among later wardens that prisoners in that lower cell sometimes begged to be moved to the rack instead. Some historians argue that such stories grew in the retelling, that the image of men consumed alive served Protestant and Catholic propaganda alike. Still, the architectural reality remains. Cold stone, river damp, no light. In darkness, small bodies move without shame. The man slaps at his legs until strength fails. Sleep becomes impossible. Infection follows scratches too small to see. When he is finally brought upward, he does not walk straight. He speaks differently. Whether the dungeon alone broke him or whether other tools were used is unclear. The tower keeps its silences. Across an ocean and into the 20th century, steel replaces stone. In detention centers across Chile, Argentina, and Brazil during the military dictatorships of the 1960s through the 1980s, interrogation rooms were engineered for efficiency. Fluorescent lights hum above concrete floors. The prisoner is bound to a metal frame. Tubing lies coiled on a table nearby. The rat is not medieval here. It is urban, pulled from sewers beneath Santiago or Buenos Aires, agitated, contained. Reports gathered decades later by truth commissions describe methods where animals were driven, through pipes toward restrained bodies. Survivors recount pressure, invasion, the deliberate weaponization of instinct. These testimonies are recorded in court archives and human rights investigations. Some details vary. Certain former officials denied such practices entirely, calling them fabrications of political enemies. Yet multiple independent accounts align in structure, if not in every physical detail. The prisoner cannot see what moves inside the tube. Breath becomes ragged before contact occurs. The threat alone fractures resistance. Medical reports from the period describe trauma consistent with invasive assault, though documentation was often destroyed. In clandestine facilities, soundproof walls absorbed screams. Here, the rat is not spectacle. It is strategy. The woman on the table stares at the ceiling as boots shift around her. Sweat runs into her hairline. She cannot move her wrists. The tube is positioned with clinical detachment. Outside, traffic continues. Governments issue statements about national security and order. Inside, fear is calibrated. Confessions extracted under such regimes were later reviewed by courts, attempting to rebuild fractured societies. Some perpetrators were tried. Others vanished into retirement. The rats returned to sewers, unaware of ideology. The body remembers what institutions prefer to forget. Return now to Germany, to late medieval towns where timber frames leaned over narrow streets and church bells marked the hours. The rat chair, as later generations would name it, appears in fragmented references. A metal cage fixed over the head or face, containing starved animals. The condemned man is seated, immobilized, the cage locked into place. There is no heat this time, only proximity. The rats begin at the softest points: nose, ears, lips. The victim's hands cannot rise to defend. Blood runs downward, soaking into cloth at the collar. Bystanders may or may not be present. In some towns, punishment was public. In others, confined to inner courtyards where only officials observed. Whispers spread that certain executioners preferred this method because it left the torso intact, preserving a grotesque semblance of order. Yet historians caution that documentation is sparse and sometimes conflated with later folklore. Illustrations from early modern pamphlets often exaggerated devices to sell copies. What cannot be dismissed is the medieval fixation on visible consequence. The face is identity. To destroy it is to erase testimony. In regions of the Holy Roman Empire where law blended civic authority and local custom, punishment needed to be remembered. A faceless man wandering beyond city gates served as warning without words. He rarely wandered far. Across all these methods, centuries apart, one element remains constant. The rat does not carry ideology. It carries hunger. Humans supply the rest. In Alkmaar, in Rome, in London, in Santiago, officials justified actions with language of necessity, order, salvation, stability. Chroniclers argued over numbers. Some minimized, some magnified. Records burned in wars, or were sealed in archives accessible only generations later. Myths grew where facts thinned. In taverns near the tower, guides once swore that entire chambers were lowered into pits writhing with vermin, though architectural surveys have found no such mechanism. In the Netherlands, opponents of Sonoy circulated stories that he laughed during interrogations, a detail unsupported by surviving correspondence. In South America, rumors claimed foreign advisors introduced specific techniques, claims still debated among scholars. Certainty decays faster than stone. What persists is pattern. Authority restrained a body. An animal was introduced. Escape was denied. The result was not merely pain, but the inversion of the natural order, where the smallest creature became instrument of the state. The final image is not of blood. It is of waiting, a bowl cooling after use, a dungeon door closing, a tube removed and washed, a cage unlatched and carried away. Administrators return to desks. Clerks enter dates into ledgers. Empires continue. Nations rebuild. Towers become tourist sites. Below the surface, in cellars and sewers, the rats endure. They breed beneath cities layered over older cities. They move through foundations laid in medieval mud and reinforced with modern concrete. They do not remember Rome. They do not remember Sonoy. They do not remember the juntas. But the architecture remembers. Stone walls absorb sound. Iron retains heat. Paper preserves signatures authorizing measures deemed necessary at the time. Each era believes its methods justified, its threats exceptional, its violence contained. And yet the pattern reappears, adapted to new rooms, new uniforms, new language. Some insist these stories are exaggerated, that cruelty this deliberate must belong to rumor rather than record. Others point to testimonies, court findings, municipal archives, and say the opposite. The truth lies not in a single chamber, but in recurrence. Power learns quickly. In the end, the rat survives the empire, the rebellion, the dictatorship. It survives the prisoner. It survives the interrogator. And somewhere tonight, in a city far removed from Rome or London or Santiago, claws scratch behind a wall, unseen, patient. If history has already shown how easily hunger can be turned into policy, what prevents it from happening again?